Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Lecture Series. Sit back, get comfortable, and let's go see what they have for us today.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another of the Peninsula Seniors Wednesday morning lecture. We really have an interesting and different program this morning. We're really fortunate to have a very interesting, very talented individual with us, Dr. Laszlo Germich, a physician, retired physician, and was born in Budapest. He and his wife, Amelia, managed to get out in 1956, right ahead of the communists. He's a retired anesthesiologist and a medical researcher from LA Biomed, and most importantly, as you can see behind me, he is an Impressionist artist and lives here in the peninsula. What you'll see and hear about are copies of some of his works of Monet, Pissarro, Manet, Van Gogh, Gauguin. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Laszlo Germich.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will start with an unusual way of introducing an art lecture, with a book. This is called the Gothic Cathedral and was given to me by a very good friend who also happens to be a famous person in the science of chemistry, George Olah from University of Southern California, who, when he saw my paintings for the first time and my interest in Monets Cathedral art, referred me to a friend of him who was also at USC by the name of Robert Phillip, who is a board member of the Peninsula Seniors, and recommended that I get acquaintance with him, which strangely didn't happen before, although I found out later that Bob was living about 200 yards away from us here on the peninsula. The book was from him, and Bob was an enthusiast and knowledgeable person about Gothic architecture and history. Less on the art side, but more strongly on the architecture and history side. And I was representing the interest in the Gothic Cathedral as an art object and came together with my admiration to Monet, Claude Monet, the leading Impressionist artist, who created a wonderful series of 30 paintings depicting the Rouen Cathedral. Now, after this introduction, I just will give back the book to Bob, who lent it to me, and start out introducing myself a little bit behind what I heard just a minute ago from Marty. I am not a professional artist. I am, by training and experience, a medical researcher primarily, engaged in the field of pharmacology, first in my first 20 years of professional life, and later on in anesthesiology, from which I retired from the Harbor UCLA Medical Center about 6 years ago. I took up painting around 40 years ago without formal training, but I grew up in a family which was rich in, I believe, artistic background. My great-grandfather was an art teacher. My grandfather on my father's side was a stained glass window designer. My father, an internist, a physician, was active in photography and very much so in watercolor, to the extent that it helped him to survive and pull through a POW period in the Soviet Union for more than 4 years. Painting kept him alive. Now, after this, I would like to start two major parts of the lecture. One is Monet. I am sorry Impressionists produced so much and so diverse artwork that in one lecture even a professional cannot cover it. But Monet, since he is one of my heroes, will get the first attention and almost exclusive attention during this presentation today, describing mainly his affinity to this Gothic masterpiece in Rouen, the cathedral which stands still there after 700 years and creates constant attraction and maintains constant affinity to artists like Monet and artists before him and after. I will also give examples of those during this presentation. So let's go to the slides. First, I will talk about Monet the artist with particular reference to his cathedral series. Second, I will outline a little bit my interest and involvement in painting. And third, I will go and discuss thoughts about Apres art. We talk about Monet as the leading Impressionist. He was born to a middle-class family in Normandy in 1840 and was educated and lived mostly in France with the exception of a one-year stay in London during the French-Prussian War, from which period derived the early London series of paintings. He produced a later London series of paintings in 1900 and 1902, wonderful painting depicting the Parliament building and the different bridges in London. He is, of course, the best-known Impressionist artist, and the movement itself, Impressionism, derives from one of his paintings. This is the painting which he presented in the first Impressionists art show in Paris in 1874. He painted Impression Sunrise of the Rouen harbor, and that gave name to the Impressionist movements. Monet's great forte was his amazing utilization on canvas, the variations of different light effects. Besides being an outstanding colorist, and he admitted that color is my joy, my obsession, and also frustration. Cézanne, a colleague, a very able and famous colleague of his, said of him, "Monet is only one eye, but what an eye." He had a special visual acuity and talent to transform the images on his retina into very colorful, original, and really inspiring marvels of color. He was a very diligent man and was blessed with a long, active life. He produced over 2,400 paintings, and at age 86 died in the very same year when I was born. And he left, obviously, a permanent legacy in Western art. Here is the famous painting dated 1872. When we go about getting familiar with an artist, you look for a comprehensive encyclopedia-like source. And to my fortune, my wife gave me this wonderful 4-volume compilation of all Monet's artwork in the form of the Wildenstein catalog, which is published second time by Taschen Books in Cologne, Germany. And as you can see, volume 3 looks pretty worn. That is the volume where Monet's cathedral paintings are, which I used extensively, and you can see the wear on the binding already. Monet was very famous because he created permanent series of paintings depicting one single theme. And one of his earlier series dealt with the railroad station, Saint-Lazare. So here are one example of Gare Saint-Lazare's. The next series in chronological order was the haystacks, an example, one of the 24 or even more than 24 haystacks he produced at different seasons, at different lighting conditions and different stages of the day. Then came the poplar trees, again a fantastically colorful list of marvelous paintings. Then came finally the second London series with the Parliament building and different bridges, as I mentioned before. Came after that the water lilies, which represented his last and most voluminous series of, I think, well over 100 water lily and flower paintings, ranging from 1900 to 1926, the year he died. And then, not chronologically in order, but one of the last series is the Cathedral series, on which I commemorated him in front of the cathedral, and I call him the Cathedral Man on this picture. As I mentioned, there are artists before Monet who were caught with an interest of the cathedral. And here is Turner's rendering of the cathedral square, which at that time was more spacious, more wide than today, and it presents now a problem. It already presented a problem for Monet because he just searched a good angle to paint the cathedral, which was just too close. And of course, we can use the wide-angle lenses, but as we know, the wide-angle lenses distort and give really crooked images. So Monet had this problem. He couldn't go far away from the cathedral. He squinted and he created adjustments, and it worked wonderfully because, as I just deviate a little bit of the cathedral pictures, in general, Monet's art and Impressionist art should not be looked at like going 2 feet close to the painting. The cathedral paintings are of about this size, maybe 1 inch or 2 inch larger, but they cannot be fully appreciated closer than, I would say, 20 or 30 feet at least. Now, this is, as I said, Turner's rendering of the cathedral. And then I would like to outline a little bit the story how he started with his cathedral paintings in 1892, and with interruptions continued for 2 years. In comparison, I have to tell you that with interruptions, I was working on his cathedrals for 30 years. Of course, my interruptions were longer than his, and of course, my technique and skill was, of course, much, much different from his virtuosity, so he could finish a cathedral more or less. He admitted, though, that he never could, and no one could ever finish a painting like that fully and say, that's it, that is completely finished. He still reached back and made corrections on his paintings, often in the studio. The main emphasis was in his series the varying light effects on the stone surface of a building, which is the same. It is not like a still life or a portrait where the subject moves or the colors are different or the form is changing. That stone wall is there, static, absolutely. And he created these tremendous variations of shades, of colors, of hues, dependent on the single variable, the light effect. Here I present 2 frontal views. Out of the 30 paintings total, Monet painted only the front, straight ahead, on 2 paintings. One was never finished. This is on the right. The other has been finished, and of course it carries the Wildenstein catalog numbers. I will give this on the paintings to identify them better. So in case somebody is interested and happen to have or will have this wonderful collection of volumes, can go by the numbers and find that particular cathedral painting. Here is one of my copies. I think it is probably this one, which I did in 1984. There is another one, the only Monet cathedral painting which is in his town, Rouen. All the 30 paintings are spread around the world, and I will discuss it a little bit later, that there was an effort, even by the very influential friend and French politician Georges Clemenceau, to preserve the cathedral series and keep it in France and be purchased by the state as a national monument. But the, at that time, President of the Republic disagreed or ignored his request, and Monet, who was already famous at that time, by the time he finished the cathedral series, 8 or 10 of these paintings were immediately sold to private dealers and investors, and they disappeared from public views. And that is very unfortunate, because nowadays even 8 or 9 are in private hands, and we don't have just any access to those. With the exception of occasional donations, which make 1 or 2 of these paintings available for public view. Monet admitted that the cathedrals were the most challenging series of paintings ever so far in his lifetime, but later on, even after he finished the later London and water lily paintings, he maintained this idea and concept that these were the most discouraging and frustrating paintings he ever created. Once he said, "I am broken, I cannot do any more," and had a night full of bad dreams. The cathedral fell on me and seemed to be pink or blue or yellow. And they were pink, blue, and yellow. His cathedrals, not the original, but he imagined enough that they are bright blue, bright yellow, bright pink, and they haunted him. Further, he thought that his pictures were only obstinate encrustations of colors. That's all. That is not painting, he said, and which he felt never could fully finish. Indeed, there is evidence that after he was working in Rouen, sometimes simultaneously on 7 or 8 panels, as the change of the day, lighting changed, he went from one painting to the other, just capture 5 or 10 minutes of the same kind of lighting condition, which he hopefully continued on Wednesday, but Wednesday became a rainy day, so he had to stack away these paintings and take them up again next week when there was a similar sunny day. But the directions of the light was not exactly the same, so he had to start to use his imagination, which he was not short of course. If you are interested enough to enjoy these artworks, how can you go about it? Fortunately, since 2001, we have one Monet Cathedral in Los Angeles, thanks to the Getty Foundation, who were the managers, or the board was wealthy enough, I think, to afford one Monet Cathedral. So the Getty now has one. That is the only on the western part of the United States. The United States has a total of 7 cathedral paintings. All of them are on the East Coast. So I would really warmly recommend to you to go once to the Getty and spend at least 10 minutes, maybe a half an hour, in front of that cathedral and just admire it. I have a little story about the spectator as the prototypical, intense, devoted spectator. That was in the Orangerie, the famous small Parisian museum, which houses the late water lily paintings of Monet. And I usually go to a museum so that once I go around in 15 or 20 minutes and cover as much distance and space I can to pick up those paintings I might be interested in. And then I, after the first rapid visit, return, if I have time, on the same day and finish the observation of some selected paintings, spending maybe 3 or 4 minutes in front of each of them. Once I went to the Orangerie, and in front of one of these wonderful large water lily paintings stood a young Oriental lady, like a statue of Buddha, didn't move, stood like this, oblivious of anything which was going around her. And I left, and I came back a half an hour later. She was standing the same way, still absorbing whatever she could absorb after half an hour. So that is one way of really immersing into art appreciation. Now, the second level of Monet's cathedral exploration would be that you go to Paris, where they happen to have in one city 6 cathedral paintings. Five are in the Musée d'Orsay, which I call the converted railroad station, and outside it is still. But if you go inside, it is turning to a wonderful museum. But sorry to say, the outside still looks a railroad station, period. And they have 5 wonderful cathedral paintings in one room, which attracts a usually large crowd. The 6th one is in the Musée Marmottan, which is a hidden jewel in Paris, a small museum on the border of Bois de Boulogne in a park-like setting, wonderful place to visit, less crowd, a limited collection of about 200 paintings, mostly of Monet, Musée Marmottan. Or you go to Rouen and see only one cathedral painting, but you can see the cathedral itself. And take your own pictures, and then if you go in the summer, you can be part of a wonderful summer night show where they put different lights on the cathedral, actually sometimes projecting a Monet painting over the surface of the cathedral. And since the angle is very demanding, it doesn't come through as you would expect just by looking the technology which we have. I was there, I saw it, and I got disappointed from this projecting part of it. I show here the one which Getty has. I think it is a wonderful piece. It is one of the nicest ones of the 30. It has beautiful beautiful light blue hues, which even with my relatively primitive digital camera gave a better color resolution than the poster or the illustration they sell in the shop, which is not light blue at all. It is violet, it is purple. So I am really amazed that in 2000s, we still cannot reproduce, or the publishers don't reproduce well enough, the colors of famous paintings. I can show you examples, there is no time for it, but I can show that in one book this cathedral looks brown, and in another one purple, and the other one is more pink than blue. So I had quite a bit of problem of making copies of those cathedrals which were not readily available for my own visit, where I could take the pictures and take sometimes notes about the painting. Well, an average, relatively educated visitor, an English artist and author whom I never heard before, but on the internet it happened to be there, and she gives a little comment of her first visit to Paris and first visit to the Musée d'Orsay. And that's what she writes there. You can run through it. I would not read the whole thing. It just leads to the conclusion that each on its own would be quite impressive of these 5 paintings in the Louvre. But however, together they acted as a magnet and drew a crowd. And indeed, Salle 34, which is representing about 40 or 50 Impressionist paintings, is perhaps the best attended museum room in the world. It is always crowded. When you go to Rouen, you can do your own pictures. Now, here was my problem. I had very limited time one day, and I took a photograph in the morning, and the facade of the cathedral looked like this. And went back in the early afternoon. I couldn't go back in the late afternoon because the train was already leaving around 3 o'clock. So I took this picture maybe at 2 p.m., which shows you not much difference in overall color, but you can see the marked difference in the sky behind and the shade down in the lower part because the sun is slowly setting in Rouen relatively early, so it was maybe at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but not later. I wish it had been around 6 when these pinkish tones sneak in and result in 3 of his pink cathedrals, one in Wales, in Cardiff. The other one is a private collection which lately went to Japan, to a public museum, fortunately, at Lake Hakone. And the third one is in an unlikely place for a famous Monet painting. Beograd, Serbia, has the third pink cathedral. This is just a quick summary of my visit to the evening show of Monets Cathedral at 2004. That is the poster with the projected image over the cathedral, which on this print comes out better than on the show it did. It really represents a fusion of a painting and the building itself. This is one type of illumination or surface of the cathedral, and the next one with another tone. So it is a nice show, but it does not fully reflect what the painter would expect when they say, we propose that this is really a superimposition of the painting over the stony surface. Modern painters followed the footsteps of those who used the cathedral as an object to paint on. Roy Lichtenstein, the pop artist, created this kind of images. I don't know how many, I think he did 6 or 8, but he emphasized that they cannot be appreciated alone. They have to be compared, and here is an example of 3. He took really in a slavish manner the outline. This is just a copy drawing from a photograph as imitating Monet's lines with a monochromatic or really dichromatic presentation, like red over light pink, purple over lighter purple, and black over a greenish surface. So it really doesn't capture the color effect. It's only the form and the primitive representation of the color. But Roy Lichtenstein is a well-known, popular artist, so here he goes down in history as a notable imitator or a notable follower of Monet's cathedral. I was fortunate in 1994 to attend the centennial exhibit in Rouen devoted to the cathedrals. And this is their catalog, front page, depicting the same facade with the different color variations. A relatively good rendering of the colors, but not perfect. They collected 20. At the first exhibit Monet organized for the cathedrals, he could also present 20. Nobody ever saw all 30 cathedral paintings of Monet. So here came my attempt to reproduce this, and about 30 years ago I decided I will make all 30 of them, and I will have it. Or my friends will have it. But anyway, it can be in one place at the same time. Not the original, an imitation. And that will lead me to the third part of the presentation of faking art, copying art, through so-called copies. There is a more modern version of changing the cathedral image. If you reduce the pixels, and I could do that and reprint it, from the rear end of this room, you probably get a pretty good image of the cathedral. From here, it is fuzzy. But that's what Monet achieved with his brush, standing maybe 2 feet from the canvas and putting on these color spots, which look really color spots from 2 feet, but his eye was such that he could, and sometimes he stepped back, of course, 5, 10 feet, and checked whether his eye adjustment or adjusting the spots of color are correct. But he could do it. Many people cannot. Now, this kind of technique has been utilized by an artist on the East Coast whose name is Sherry Levine. And I had a chance to see his very much pixel-reduced copies of the cathedral in photographic representation in a cruise which we took on a Celebrity Cruises Galaxy ship, and I found them very impressive. And she chose a good subject because besides Monets Cathedrals, he tried the same technique with Cézanne's flower paintings and some Van Gogh paintings, and they didn't come through as well as an article noted. The paintings seem to disappear into awkward jumbles of texture and flat, misshapen fruit. That is the Cézanne painting of the flowers. She tried to transform, and she used the word appropriation, appropriating art, meaning taking away from the artist and creating something which is very similar and calling it my creation. So it is one way of faking, in a sense. But she's very clever, she's very talented, and I think she is very capable of doing this modern approach. Now, my interest in involvement in painting, I will run a little bit faster from here because I spent too much time with my hero, Monet. During a span of 40 years, I have created an Apres Art collections of mainly French Impressionist paintings, but post-Impressionists, old Italian and Renaissance masters also. And I don't remember the names, and I didn't want to put in so many names, but let me read these because there are too many. Of the Impressionists, I copied Pissarro, Sisley, Renoir, Cézanne, Manet. Of the post-Impressionists, I engaged in making pictures of Utrillo, Gauguin, Van Gogh, Marquet, Klee, and Van Dongen. Old Italian masters were copied by me, like Botticelli, Uccello, Perugino, Filippino Lippi, da Messina, della Francesca, Di Credi, Raffaello, and Ghirlandaio, just to name a few. And Pollaiuolo, which was named Veneziano for a while. Anyway, and works of few Flemish artists. One Rembrandt painting I did, it's quite difficult, and particularly Vermeer. I made a few Vermeers, which came out, I think, pretty nicely. And that's about the range. And I find my collection unique, and here are the reasons. First, I started painting as a hobby. I was not pressed as a professional artist who wants to sell his paintings on time or finish a painting on order. I didn't hurry and had no deadlines. Before starting, I made a thorough study of the painting. I visited the museum, took notes, photographs. Often I compared the progress and the end results visiting the many corresponding museums from Los Angeles to Tokyo. And on this sheet, I name about 30 cities. I wouldn't read it to you. Of course, many of them are in Europe, and many of them are in the eastern United States. But anyway, as a unique accomplishment, I believe, is that I really reproduced all 30 cathedral paintings of Monet. Whether the series is finished or not, asked me, it depends on my mood. One day I would say I had enough of this, they are finished. But sometimes I say, no, this needs a little bit of adjustment here, that one on the left upper corner, and so on and so on. Anyway, here is just an example. This is a note I took in Moscow in front of one of the two cathedrals they have. This is the painting in question, one of them. I don't show the other one, it is more grayish purple. This is another famous painting of bleak weather by Monet, the original. The copy is here. This has a separate story. This is beautiful pink color spots and hues and orange and blue and ochre and whatever. And I chased this painting. I went to Boston to the Fine Arts Museum twice. The painting was on loan on both occasions. Third time I went to Las Vegas, where there was a show at the Bellagio Hotel with 30-some Impressionist paintings, taken from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, among them listed the blue and the pink cathedral. And I went there, and I asked for the pink cathedral. I haven't seen it anywhere. And the guard said, "Sorry, sir, 4 pictures out of the 30 were taken away just 4 days ago. They are not here anymore." Never saw the painting. This is in Washington, bright daylight. I had a copy, and unfortunately 4 months ago I had a fire in our house, and some of my paintings burned completely, and this was severely damaged to the extent that I will have to spend a lot of time to restore it. That is, the original is in Wales, in Cardiff, is one of the pink or reddish cathedrals. This is my copy, by the way. And the last one is similar to this, but not identical. This is the original is in the Musée d'Orsay. This one is very similar. It is in Basel. This is my home with 4 reduced-size Monet Cathedral copies, because I did one series in full size and another series in reduced size, because I can see all 30 of them in my home. My home is not large enough to accommodate the whole series in full size, or my wife will kill me because cannot have other paintings in the house. These are the full-sized ones. This is the one here. The other one is this white one, and the third one is not shown here. Now I turn to the third part of the presentation, is thoughts about painting and apres art. What is painting? I am a simplistic person. I try to give simple explanations to complicated things. I think that's the only way to approach the complexity of a problem, because if you start out with a too complex idea, you just don't see where you are going. So what I am saying, painting is to a great extent copying. We copy nature or other paintings, or we interpret images which we perceive, we interpret this with a brush as they appear in our memory or in our dreams. And the dreams can be natural or even drug-enhanced, like the famous paintings of some famous painters like Van Gogh, who were in many times delirium while he was painting, either drinking too much or being intoxicated by just touching and licking on his fingers. We were full of lead or other chromium or titanium containing oil paints. So he was heavy metal intoxicated, maybe. And there is actually a couple of books written about his deterioration or even enhancement of his abilities by these chemical means. Then what is the value of a painting? Strangely, paintings nowadays are considered as valuable art objects only by using the yardsticks of originality, quote unquote. What is original, what is not original? Another difficult question. Or novelty, like really ultra-modern art, which is way out of my reach and understanding, like music composed in the last 40 years. Or, and it is underlined with bold letters, signature frame. Copying apres art remains largely unappreciated and undervalued. This is my humble opinion. Originality, question. It is all play with words. It says quantitative differences. Copying purposes is either learning, faking, forging, counterfeiting, or just a hobby. Or we can call it simulation, imitation, emulation, adaptation, reflection. And it comes when the artist modifies, not only copies. Modification, alteration, derivation, source of a study, recreation, etc., etc. So the faker can say, I am recreated, and some of them really did. They emphasize that these are not copies. This is my interpretation of something, but it is my original work. And it is a matter of dispute. Now, a classical example, a much admired painting, one of the most well-recognized and admired paintings in the world, the Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe in Paris. Or I call it the Judgment of Paris to the Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. Or we can call it the Raphael Raimondi Manet conversion. This is the Marc-Antonio Raimondi's variation of the Judgment of Paris, which was originally Raphael's painting, detail. And here is the painting of Manet. The three figures are sitting exactly in the same position. It is a obvious copying of the posture of all three. The difference is that the two gentlemen are dressed in 19th century costumes. Second example, about the signature fame. Authentication of an on-site drawing by Picasso. Is this yours, master? How much did you pay for it? 200,000 francs. Of course it is mine. The third example is involving me. The green to red pastiche, no more. I mean, it's just this little change, the color. Van Dongen to Yermak. And the other is the red to green transformation. Again, Ghirlandaio to Yermak conversions. This is Van Dongen's green-dressed lady. This is my red-dressed lady. Then comes the other two, Ghirlandaio's pink-bodiced young girl, and the next my green-dressed girl. So it's imitation, it's copy. And I wouldn't dare to say this is my Renaissance painting of a young lady. It is Ghirlandaio's painting, modified. We can discuss copy versus forgery of art objects. It is a fascinating subject and a lot written about it. And the verdict is not there. We just cannot clearly say, you are a dirty forger, but you are a great artist. The line to draw is very difficult. And I deviate from art here. I found it in life. One of the most difficult questions is how to draw a line, how to separate sides along a line. From Wikipedia encyclopedia, these are the definitions. Forgery is the process of making, adapting, or imitating objects, statistics, or documents with the intent to deceive. And art forgery refers to creating and, in particular, selling works of art that are falsely attributed to be work of another, usually more famous artist. There were many artists who copied, either as an educational effort or a commercial effort or whatever, or self-satisfying themselves. But there are just a very few examples here. Rubens copied Titian. Michelangelo copied and deceived with his copies Ghirlandaio. Pollaiuolo copied Botticelli, and C.L. Velázquez, not the classical Velázquez, but another Spaniard who lived about 150, 200 years later, copied Goya and made over 700 paintings of Goya copies. Delacroix copied Rubens, Gauguin copied Manet, and Klimt finally copied Japanese paintings. Modern copying enterprises sprung up in the last century. There are few which I can mention. These are hiring a few talented, accomplished artists. Like one I bought a painting from in the Louvre, whom I hired to make paintings. Actually, he made me a Filipino Lippi Madonna and a Chardin still life for me, for which I paid a total of maybe $2,000 in the 70s. And they are magnificent. So this gentleman, for example, Miguel Canales, hires 2 or 3 of those kind of artists who make single museum quality or museum quality plus copies. And they are selling for substantial amounts. Christophe Petil Company in Paris, Professor Dondi in Italy, and finally the Pozin brothers from Russia, Mikhail, Eugeni, and Semyon, who operate 2 studios, one in Russia and one in Berlin, Germany. Then comes the other version of copies, the mass production. And you open the internet and you see dozens and dozens of companies who are offering quick fix for the copy. They take your order and you can buy practically any painting which is going to be finished in China or Russia or Eastern Europe for you for usually less than $500. How good the copy is another matter, but it is available. And they are flooding the market now. Now there are famous or infamous forgers of the modern era. I will list you only a few whose work and life both are interesting. Eric Hebon, a sensational draftsman who was talented student, silver medal winner at the Royal Academy, couldn't make living on his own art, started faking drawings. Many of his superb works have been placed to famous British museums and auctioned off at Christie's as originals. Later, he lived in Rome, where after having written 2 books on art forgery, has been murdered in a dark alley by a blow to the head. Elomi De Hory, this is my favorite guy, Hungarian, strangely born about 20 years ahead of me in the same block in Budapest, 4 apartment houses away. Claimed to be an aristocrat and a descendant of a rich family who had significant art collections, ended up in Paris studying painting and was masterly copying Picasso, Modigliani, Dufy, and Matisse. He fell victim of the unscrupulous marketing of 2 boyfriends, went on grand scale producing many of facsimiles, running into trouble both in the US and France and Europe. He lived on high heels in Ibiza, in the island of Ibiza, befriending many international celebrities. Disillusioned and depressed, committed an overdose suicide. His fascinating life story is preserved, and I warmly recommend to you to read this, in Fake, by the controversial author Clifford Irving, who was actually jailed for a few weeks with his wife for the fabrication of this life story of the Howard Hughes, the famous aviator, who never gave the interview to them, but nevertheless, Irving did make the bona fide biography of Hory, because they were friends. And there is also a documentary movie, F for Fake, which was directed by Orson Welles. The Hory made a few statements, many times irresponsible statements. He was a very flamboyant character. He said, I paint my own paintings in the style of Van Gogh. I never signed one, only his friends did. Picasso was terribly easy for me. Utrillo and Corot has been copied so much I never even bothered. Monet was a genius, difficult to copy, he said, and the most difficult to him were Cézanne and Braque. David Stein is a French-born painter who lived in the US, claimed, as many other fakers, that he merely painted in the style of a given celebrated artist. He specialized making Chagall, Picasso, Klee, and Cocteau lookalikes. Arrested in New York, served a jail sentence in the US, deported to France, and after his release, he reverted to sign his own paintings and did a reasonably well living from that time on. Tom Keating, born into a poor London family, art restorer forger, produced over 2,000 paintings from over 100 different artists. he became an ardent critic of, and this is important, rotten gallery system, which is prevailing here and all over the world, dominated by US-led avant-garde fashion. Remember the Dali prints, the Chagall prints by the 10,000s, and the promoting company says, ladies and gentlemen, this is a limited series of 200 printings. And once I went on one of the cruise ships to this art promoter and I said, may I ask you, this series of limited edition is the only one? Or is there another limited series on another cruise ship in Hong Kong, in Dubai, or Boston? How many limited editions exist? His Gainsboroughs and Cézannes became famous and fetched high prices at London auctions. Jan van Meegeren. This Dutch artist goes down in art history as the forger of Vermeer paintings par excellence. I tend to disagree. Van Meegeren was a knowledgeable artist, meticulous and exacting, but not a great painter or forger. It remains a mystery how he could fool the experts and customers like Nazi Germany's Field Marshal Goering, who bought a couple of paintings from him, as Vermeer's, of course. After World War II, the aging artist was brought to trial for collaboration and fraud. Having spent only the first few weeks in a Dutch jail, the depressed old man died of heart failure. Was his death premature remains to be unanswered. But some of these forgers, as you could see, either committed suicide, were murdered, or died in jail. So not a very happy ending of your life if you engage in that kind of activity. There is an fake net website. And according to them, we have to adopt a reasonable objective attitude toward faking. In a sense, recognizing the talent of the fakers, not the ethics, but the painting talent. Many of us share a secret admiration for the faker, despite the hurt and loss that their deceptions have caused. But surely we admire them most of all for their sheer genius. Not all of them, but many of them. A talent which enabled the world's greatest fakers create so brilliantly the fakes that actually dupe the experts. And this is the greatest satisfaction for a forger, that there comes this board of expert, quote unquote, and they give kind of theatrical performances as the composition of the lower part of the painting, where the velvet is unfolding from this slightly oblique, illuminated light, and so on and so on. They go into this fancy wording, and they bring a verdict. Beautiful original artwork. Or at the same token, come on, don't try to fool me. I saw it in the first moment that it was a cheap fake. And these are the experts. And sometimes, like I think the wine experts, who can sniff a red wine and say, Chateau Margaux, 1957. I am not 100% sure. It might be 58. How about Chateau Giscourt or Chateau Lafitte Rothschild or Chateau Latour? Doesn't come close. Well, I still would like to have a blind tasting, a true blind tasting, and these experts telling me that it is indeed a Chateau Lafitte Rothschild 1973 and not 74 or 69. They may have, and true, some of the sniffers have a sense which is amazing, because I noticed that in the famous perfumery Fragonard on the Riviera at Eminos, the town I forgot, Grasse, where this taster or sniffer is presented with about a dozen flower extracts, distillate, and he says 2% of that 16% of that, 38% of the third, 9% of the fourth, and then we create a new perfume, because that is optimal. And the percentage is spelled out by him just based on the smell. That I admire. There are prints. That is a wonderful solution for somebody on a limited budget and wants to have a nice copy of Monet or Cézanne or Raphael or Ghirlandaio, or whatever. And the modern printing techniques, many times on canvas, can reproduce sometimes true color and texture imitations, but often not. I give here a few references. The wonderful Wildenstein catalog of 4 volumes, published by Taschen Wildenstein, 1996. Pissarro's great nephew or a relative, Joachim Pissarro, Camille Pissarro's relative, published Cathedrals of Rouen lately, 1990. Rouen, Les Cathédrales de Monet, Musée des Beaux-Arts, Rouen, as a catalogue of the Centennial Exhibit, 1994. Tucker, who is a professor of art in Boston and curator of one of the leading museums there, organized a series painting collection of Monet's art and presented in his book really wonderfully color-printed examples. I think this is the best as far as color reproduction goes. Among them were about 9 cathedral paintings, many poplar trees, many haystacks, and so on, all very well done. The time was 1989. And finally, lately I got this Leffingwell Cathedrals Monet, which is a folding out album representing practically all Rouen cathedrals, maybe the exception of those which are in private hand. And this is the closing slide, which is my largest painting. That is called the Battaglia di San Romano by Paolo Uccello, dated 1470s, maybe 1476, depicting a battle scenes between some competing Italian tribes of the Middle Ages. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Senior Lecture Series. I'm Betty Wheaton. See you next time.